Great. Okay, so we're going from the macro to the micro. A few people in this room know what ATA Carnets are, and this segue is kind of interesting. But I'm Leslie August. My company is Boomerang Carnets. I'm Senior Vice President there and one of the owners. We're located here in Barrington. And we're going to talk about import duties and taxes and how to avoid those or minimize those when you're going to an international trade show. Let's do that. If there's anything that I wish you would take away from my comments today is that you choose your temporary import strategy wisely. I'm going to talk about carnets, but they're not the be-all and end-all. They're one way to do it. There are other ways to do it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those other ways as well. And this is similar to what Larry said. There is no one-size-fits-all because your circumstances, where you're going, what you're shipping, how you're doing it is going to be different in every situation. So you want to make sure you match up the documentation, the temporary export method to actually what you're doing. Little bit of background. You may or may not know that anything being imported into another country, even temporarily, has duties and taxes assessed on it. So you can't just show up at the border with your exhibit booth and say to the customs inspector, well, I'm going to be bringing this out in 2 weeks, so here's my promise that I'm going to be bringing it out in 2 weeks and let me get through. They don't actually believe you. They want the revenue of their country to be protected. You're going to be assessed duties and taxes unless you figure out another way to get it in where you don't have to pay those duties and taxes. And while import duties are relatively low right now compared to historic levels, value-added taxes are not. So you're looking at as high as 25% in some cases. Certainly that's true in Europe, Japan, Canada, where they're called GST. We don't have a value-added tax here, so we're not so tuned into this. But everywhere else in the world, excuse me, they typically have VAT, and it's assessed when you import into that country. So what you want to consider, and the factors that you're going to take into account, are going to be the number of trips you're taking, the countries that you're shipping to, which countries you're shipping to, the value of what you're exporting, and the tax and duty rates. One exception to bullet number 1 up there, things being dutiable and taxable, is in every country there is an amount under which it's not dutiable and taxable, but for our purposes everything is going to be of a value that is going to definitely be dutiable and taxable. So these are some different ways that people choose or companies choose to manage their temporary import strategy. And Larry mentioned some of these. The rent-a-booth option is one where, okay, so for your exhibit booth, you're renting it in-country, or you're contracting for it in-country. You may have a distribution center there. You may have other sources there that are going to source your product samples, your demonstration equipment. You may not actually be bringing anything in temporarily. So you would be avoiding all the duty and tax that way. Now, if you're bringing in swag, giveaways, those are always dutiable and taxable, so that you'd have to pay on. But if everything else is sourced in country, you really don't have to worry about it. You have the option of simply letting the freight forwarder or trade show organizer decide for you how it's going to be done. Typically, they have a way of doing it. They have their connections, their relationships, and you can simply allow them to decide how it's done and just pay the bill at the end. You can alternately take responsibility for choosing that temporary import method, and there are some ways that you can do it. The ATA Carnet is one that we'll talk about in some detail. TIB, Foreign Temporary Importation Bond, which is specific to each country. You can use the foreign customs broker's entry bond. And there are sometimes waivers negotiated by the trade show organizer so that for a specific trade show, there may not even be any duty or tax that's owed. So you'd want to know that as well. Then you would not have to pay those duties and taxes for that specific show. It's always negotiated for a specific show. Or you could do a hybrid of these. So you might decide to rent the booth locally or in the country, but say you've got a $100,000 piece of equipment you're shipping over to demonstrate. Well, that you're going to have to pay duty and tax on when you come into the country, and then you can decide, are you going to use an ATA Carnet because you're going to bring it back out, or are you going to make a permanent entry because it's going to stay there at your distribution center? So you can decide, depending upon your circumstances, which one of these methods is best for you. The question that we ask ourselves when we're evaluating a temporary import method or a temporary import document are these questions. And I actually have all these kind of with the answers in a handout if you want to take it with you, if this is something you're interested in. And the answer to all of these, as far as the ATA is concerned, is yes. And I'll just go through them quickly. Is it easily obtained? Can you get the document ahead of time so that you're prepared before you go overseas? It's not something you have to get once you're there or when you're trying to clear the goods. Does it not only cover duty-free entry of those goods to the foreign country, but what about bringing them back into the U.S.? Because they have to prove, you have to prove that they actually originated here and that duty and tax has already been paid, so you need documentation to get them back. Is your method going to achieve that objective? Do you get the entry documents prior to departure? So do you know ahead of time that you've got the documents, that they're in order, that everything's been quality checked? Are all your fees, potentially security deposits and premiums, fixed, known, and paid ahead of time? This is one where it helps you not to have any surprises. You don't want to get that bill after the show's over or partway through the show and find out, oh my gosh, didn't realize that was going to be $4,500. Is there anything we can do about it? Well, no, now it's too late. So with the ATA Carnet, you know ahead of time what the cost of that temporary importation is going to be. Not all the costs, because you may have other support or help with a foreign customs broker, but you know the costs around the customs entry. Is the payment in U.S. dollars? Would be better to be in U.S. dollars than having to worry about different currency and the cost of currency fluctuations. Can you pay by credit card? Can you pay for that? You know, you can pay for your ATA Carnet ahead of time by credit card. If you're overseas, can you pay by credit card? If you're hand carrying something, or if somebody is representing you, or are they paying on your behalf? Do you have unlimited use of that document for up to a year? So every scheme I mentioned earlier, with the exception of the ATA Carnet, works for one country one time. Whereas the ATA Carnet document, if you're using the same equipment, the same goods, you can use that document more than once, and you can use it for up to a year. I'll give you the caveat that for exhibitions and fairs, which is one of the purposes of the ATA Carnet, it's limited to 6 months. But you can get it extended, and typically you're not going to need it for more than 6 months in any event. Will you get a full refund of your duty or tax deposit, and what are the penalties for failure to re-export? So when you really get into the weeds with this stuff, these are the kinds of questions that you want to ask about your temporary import method. A little more detail about the ATA Carnet. ATA stands for Admission Temporaire, temporary admission, and Carnet is a French word meaning ticket. Some people translate it as passage. It's French because it comes from the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris, and it's been around for about 50 years. It's a unified customs document, unified meaning all the forms are the same, whatever country you get it issued in. It provides for duty and tax-free admission for 3 main categories of goods. So commercial samples, professional equipment, and goods for display at trade fairs and exhibitions. It goes to a worldwide system of countries, which is just up to 85 countries as of last week when Indonesia announced that they would be accepting and issuing carnets effective May 15th. It's a printed document. It has no electronic alternative. What you're looking at there is this jacket is what the U.S. Carnet uses. So it's an orange and gold and blue jacket. It's unique to the United States. If you were to see an ATA Carnet document from the U.S., chances are it would have that jacket on it. The forms you're looking at underneath, the yellow and the green, those are the same forms they use for the actual Carnet all over the world. This is a very useless slide that shows you all the countries that the carnets are in. I think this was made by the designer who did the slideshow. I did highlight Indonesia here because it's new, but on our website there is an entire list, much more easily readable than this, of all the ATA Carnet countries, up to date with links to advisories related to those countries. So here's an example of costs. And this is the two extremes. This is using the Carnet versus payment of duties and taxes. This is an example of a $20,000 value to the UK. And you can see the first line there, the ATA Carnet processing fee, the Carnet bond, miscellaneous costs like shipping it overnight, the Carnet itself, and then on the duties and taxes, what it would be if you were paying the import duty and tax. Assume there like a 3% duty rate and 20% VAT. So you're looking at $460 for the Carnet, $3,500 duty and tax, for a savings of over $300 if you were to compare those two methods. And if you were to use your Carnet more than once, you can multiply the savings out as many times as you use it. This is a pretty average example of comparing the use of a Carnet to duty and tax. So you get the idea of why looking at this expense or this cost is important. Applying for a Carnet can be done online. It's very simple. The only thing about the paper document that's paper is the document itself. The application, the bond, all of that is done in one application online. There are actually 2 service providers in the United States. We're one of them. And we have another one represented here. Roanoke Trade Services is another ATA Carnet service provider, both located in the Chicago area. You are in the Carnet capital of the United States. So simply register for an account. We have Carnet specialists, as does Roanoke, that will help you through the process. There are helplines, there are phone numbers, there are websites, and we're happy to consult with you pretty much on any detail you have related to using an ATA Carnet, especially if you haven't done one before. There are also videos, a video series online that tells you how to use it once you get it. So there's all kinds of supporting documentation that'll help you through it. Thank you very much. That's all I've got.